The first time regular show kills someone, the show is barely 12 minutes old. Two slacker employees ignore a warning note, connect two wires in a hidden basement arcade, and summon something the episode literally calls the Destroyer of Worlds, and it proceeds to burn the birthday party guests to ash before the opening credits have cooled. The show played it as a punchline. We laughed, changed the channel, moved on, and then the show kept going, and over 7 years and 244 episodes, it kept killing people, and the deaths kept getting harder to laugh at, until the series ended with a character choosing to fly into the sun to save everything he loved, and his last words were not a joke. Tonight we are going through all of it. Every death, every near death, every villain destroyed, and every soul wagered. Every character lost to a wall coming down or a demon in a machine. And the one sacrifice at the end that broke the cycle for good. Get comfortable, we will be here a while. And if you have not subscribed to Velvo, it really does help us keep making these. Regular show aired on Cartoon Network from September 6th, 2010 to January 16th, 2017. 8 seasons, 244 episodes. Created by J.G. Quintel, who also voiced Mordecai, the show's Blue Jay protagonist. It began as a college thesis project before becoming one of the strangest, most quietly ambitious animated series the network ever produced. On the surface, it was about two 23-year-old slackers working at a municipal park. Mordecai was the Blue Jay. His best friend Rigby was the raccoon. Their boss Benson was a gumball machine with a genuinely impressive temper. Their co-worker Skips was an immortal yeti who had been alive for longer than anyone thought to ask about. Pops was a gentle, round, lollipop-shaped man who spoke like a British aristocrat from another century. Muscle Man was a heavy-set, green-skinned figure fond of "my mom" jokes that he delivered with total conviction. High Five Ghost was a small, quiet ghost who had clearly been dead for some time before the show started, and the show never fully explained the circumstances, and that was somehow exactly right. The premise of every episode was the same. Something mundane went cosmically wrong. Mordecai and Rigby would procrastinate, avoid responsibility, make one bad decision too many, and then find themselves facing an interdimensional threat, a supernatural wager, a time paradox, or some combination of all three. The absurdity was committed and total, and it worked because the emotional reality underneath it was always genuine. These were people who cared about each other even when they refused to say it. The show understood that the best way to say something true about mortality, about loss, about the way time moves faster than you are ready for, was to sneak it in through a cartoon where a gumball machine screams at two idiots for not mowing the lawn. Death as a concept lives in regular show from the very first episode. But death as a character, a named supernatural entity with a speaking role and a personality and a documented history with the other characters, arrives properly in Season 2. And once he shows up, he never really leaves. He appears throughout the series as a recurring figure, sometimes a villain, sometimes a neutral force. Eventually, in the series finale, something that might be called an ally. His full arc across the show is worth understanding before we get into the individual deaths, because it is not just a running gag. It is a relationship that changes over 8 years. Death in regular show is British accented, sardonic, and deeply competitive. He does not merely arrive to collect souls, he makes wagers about it. He turns death into a negotiating table. He has a massively muscular right arm, and this is not an arbitrary character design choice. He trained that arm specifically to beat Skips, the immortal yeti, at arm wrestling. Death and Skips have a rivalry that runs through the show's mythology, and it is personal in a way the show never entirely explains, which is the right call. Some antagonisms do not need an origin story. He is also, and this is where the show leans into comedy without undercutting the menace, a domestic figure. He has a wife. He has a son named Thomas, who by most fan accounts is centuries old, but behaves like an infant, which raises its own set of questions. He makes deals and then complains bitterly about losing them. He is petty and vain and prone to elaborate schemes, and underneath all of it he is recognizably a professional trying to do a job that keeps getting complicated by a group of park employees who refuse to stay dead. The death character gives the show a mechanism for treating death as both comedic and serious at the same time. When he arrives to collect a soul, it is frightening and funny in equal measure, because you know the situation will eventually resolve. but you also know the stakes are real within the episode's logic. Characters have died on this show. Some of them have stayed dead. Not the main cast, not usually, but the background has genuine graves in it, and the show never lets you entirely forget that. What we are doing tonight is going through all of it, chronologically, season by season, so you can see how the show's relationship with death changes across 8 years. It starts as slapstick. It becomes mythology. It ends as something that is genuinely hard to watch without feeling it somewhere in your chest. Season 1 of regular show is 12 episodes, aired across the autumn and early winter of 2010, and it is mostly concerned with establishing the show's identity. The answers it provides in those 12 episodes are strange, slightly violent, and unafraid to let minor characters die in service of a punchline. The show that debuts here is already the show it will always be, in miniature. It has a park, 2 idiots, a boss who hates them, a coworker who has been alive too long, and a willingness to introduce a genuinely terrifying supernatural force in almost every installment. What it does not yet have is any interest in staying with the emotional consequences of what it puts on screen. That will come. The second episode to air was Just Set Up the Chairs, and it introduced the template the show would use for the next 7 years. Mordecai and Rigby are asked to set up chairs for a birthday party in the park. One additional task: do not go into the basement. There is a note on the basement door saying specifically not to connect 2 wires inside. Rigby connects the wires. What emerges from the resulting arcade machine is the Destroyer of Worlds, a massive pixelated demon head that immediately starts burning people to ash with energy blasts. What gets me about this episode, looking back, is the casualness of it. Party guests are reduced to silhouettes and then nothing, and the show treats it as backdrop to Mordecai and Rigby's scramble to fix what they broke. The people who died are strangers, background figures, so the show can use their deaths as atmosphere without requiring you to feel anything specific about them. This is the first version of regular show's relationship with death. Death as spectacle, as consequence for ignoring a warning sign, as a thing that happens to people who are not the main cast. Mordecai and Rigby defeat the Destroyer of Worlds by fighting it using the Lemon Chef, a character from a nearby arcade cabinet. The Lemon Chef defeats the demon, and the demon apparently becomes a cherry and is consumed. The show offered no explanation of the mechanics and clearly did not feel it needed one. The point was the escalation, the geometry of the absurdity. A note on a door says do not connect the wires. The wires get connected. A demon burns people to ash. A cartoon Lemon Chef eats the demon. The show moves on. This is the contract. Chaos and death are real, but they can also be resolved by something even more absurd than what caused them. The show is telling you, in its very first episode, what kind of universe it occupies. One where things end, and where the ending can be strange and funny and final all at the same time, and where moving on from it is simply what the characters do because the lawn still needs mowing, and Benson is going to be angry about the chairs. Meet Your Maker, which was the 6th episode of the season, is the show's first extended engagement with death as a theme, even if it was not designed as one. It begins with the park running out of hot dogs for a barbecue, which leads to Rigby sneaking into a walk-in freezer to raid the emergency supply. Inside, he discovers that the hot dogs are alive, sentient, waiting. The talking hot dogs of Meet Your Maker are a specific kind of villain. They are not trying to conquer anything. They do not want power. They are angry about a genuinely reasonable grievance. Humans have been eating them for their entire existence, and they have been planning revenge. The fact that the show takes their resentment seriously enough to articulate it, that it actually explains their motivation with a straight face, is one of the stranger things early regular show does. They are villains the show has some sympathy for, which makes the resolution stranger still. Rigby, trapped in the freezer, manages to squeeze mustard on them. The hot dogs taste themselves. The experience of tasting mustard on hot dog is apparently so overwhelming to a sentient hot dog that they cannot stop. They begin eating each other, deliriously, until every last one is gone. Their deaths are self-inflicted, caused by the pleasure of their own nature turned into compulsion. The show plays it for comedy, and it lands as comedy, but there is something underneath it that is genuinely dark. They came for revenge and ended up destroying each other in an ecstasy of cannibalism. Regular show Season 1. There is one more episode worth pausing on before we move into Season 2, and it is not a death episode at all. Rigby's Body, which aired late in 2010, shows Rigby's body literally separating from his consciousness after too much junk food. His body forces his mind out and walks around independently. This is not death, but it is the show's first real engagement with the idea that body and soul are distinct, that the self can be separated from the physical form, and that such a separation is a problem requiring active intervention. The mechanics of death and revival in regular show will return to this concept again and again. Skips will arm wrestle death for a soul. Characters will be restored by others who refuse to accept the separation as permanent. The soul in this show is not abstract. It is a thing that can be won and lost. Rigby's Body is the prototype for all of that, even if nobody was thinking about it in those terms yet. Season 2 of regular show is 28 episodes, airing across the end of 2010 and through 2011, and it is the season that transforms the show from a weird cartoon about slackers into a weird cartoon about slackers who have a documented, established relationship with the supernatural entity responsible for collecting dead souls. The first death of Season 2 is the first time anyone in the main cast is killed, and it is Mordecai who does it. It's Time aired on January 3rd, 2011. It begins as a romantic comedy. Mordecai and Rigby are planning to watch a movie with Margaret, a Red Robin who works at the coffee shop across the street and whom Mordecai has been quietly in love with since before the show started. The plans fall apart. Mordecai gets jealous. He retreats to the microwave, which in regular show's physics functions as a gateway to the time stream, and in his rage he begins filling it with clocks. Too many clocks. They create a vortex. What happens next is one of the most striking moments in the show's first 2 seasons. Mordecai, losing his mind with jealousy and frustration, shoves Rigby off the side of the speeding microwave into the time vortex. Not quite intentionally, not quite accidentally. He does it, and Rigby disintegrates. He is pulled apart by the temporal force, and he ceases to exist, and Mordecai is immediately, completely horrified by what he has done. The show does not linger on the death the way it will in later seasons. Mordecai uses Father Time to reset the timeline, and Rigby is alive again. But the episode does not let Mordecai off the hook entirely. The fact that he was capable of it, in a moment of genuine anger, is allowed to sit there quietly in the last few minutes. The jealousy that caused the death is presented as something real and uncomfortable, not just cartoon frustration. This is the episode where regular show first suggests that the emotional states of its characters have actual consequences, that feelings are not separate from the physical world but are capable of changing it, sometimes fatally. Rigby's death in It's Time is the first main cast death in the series, and it establishes the pattern. The show will kill Mordecai and Rigby, and occasionally the others, but it will always find a way to bring them back. The deaths function as emotional stakes, as the cost of whatever mistake or feeling caused them. Then they are undone, because the show still has a story to tell, and you cannot tell it with a dead raccoon. High Score, which aired on February 7th, 2011, handles death very differently. The episode introduces Garrett Bobby Ferguson, a giant floating head who holds the universe record for the arcade game Broken Bones. He is presented as genial, forthcoming, a figure of legitimate achievement. When Mordecai and Rigby break his record, he reveals himself as petty and furious, and then he explodes in a massive burst of goo. The show is clearly enjoying itself with this. The idea of a competitive record holder literally unable to survive losing. GBF is transparently a parody of real-world competitive gaming culture, and the character reads, to a lot of fans, as heavily influenced by the persona of Billy Mitchell, who was for decades considered the world champion of several classic arcade titles, and whose records have since been the subject of long, complicated disputes about their legitimacy. Whether the show intended all of that resonance is uncertain, but knowing the context now adds something to GBF that deepens the parody. A character who builds his entire identity on a record he cannot survive losing, who is revealed to have lied about his personal life even as he dies, who admits in his final moments that there was no wife. He invented her. This is a portrait of ego that is sharper than it first appears. His death is the first villain death the show treats as genuinely funny, rather than as atmosphere or horror. He explodes. The goo goes everywhere. Before he goes, he admits he lied about the wife. The show uses his death to say something about the fragility of identity built entirely on external achievement, and it does it in 11 minutes with a giant exploding head. The efficiency is remarkable. Grave sites arrived in the middle of Season 2 and introduced mass undead death to the show's available scenarios. Mordecai and Rigby set up an outdoor movie screening in the park cemetery to earn extra money. Rigby, in a move that surprises absolutely no one who knows him, puts the film in the projector backwards. The film is a three-dimensional horror picture, and playing it backwards awakens actual zombies from the cemetery beneath the audience. What follows is a full zombie combat episode, the park crew fighting through the undead while visitors assume it is all part of the show. The zombies are eventually returned to death. No main characters are killed. What this episode contributes to the show's mythology is the confirmation that the park exists on top of an actual cemetery, with actual bodies in it. That those bodies can be reanimated under the right conditions, and that death in regular show is not necessarily a permanent state even for those already dead. This quality of the show's afterlife will matter a great deal later on, when a different character exploits exactly this permeability between life and death. For now, Gravesites is the show's zombie movie episode, executed with real energy, and the specific kind of cartoon violence that gets away with a lot, because it moves fast and plays funny. What Gravesites does for the show's mythology beyond its plot is establish that the park has a history that predates the characters who currently occupy it. There are bodies under the ground there. Those bodies were people, and they died, and the circumstances of their deaths are not explored or explained. The park cemetery is treated as an ordinary feature of a municipal park, the way any park might have a fountain or a gazebo, and this normalizes death as something the park has always been adjacent to. Mordecai and Rigby are not park employees who stumbled into a world where death is possible. They are park employees at a specific location that has been accumulating death for long enough to have a full cemetery's worth of it. The show uses zombie fiction to do something zombie fiction is always doing at its best. It asks what remains when the person is gone. The zombies in grave sites are not the park goers who died in the cemetery. They are animated bodies without the specific individuals who inhabited them. They are the shape of people without the content. The crowd watching the movie, who mistake the zombie combat for part of the show, are treating the animated dead as entertainment, which is the show's joke about its own genre, about how audiences process horror into spectacle. Underneath the joke is the older observation that death does not always mean the end of motion, that bodies continue and what you lose is the person inside them. A Bunch of Baby Ducks, which aired in Season 2, handles a villain death in a way that is unusual for the show at this point. It presents the killing as heroic and earned, done by the very characters who were being threatened. The episode begins with Mordecai and Rigby discovering baby ducks in a fountain and raising them over the course of the episode. The ducks become attached to them. The villain is the duck collector, a man who wants to add the baby ducks to his collection. When he corners them, the baby ducks transform, growing into a giant, muscle-bound duck-human hybrid that defeats and kills the duck collector. The show does not dwell on this. The duck collector's death is presented as the natural conclusion of threatening creatures who are now capable of protecting themselves, and the camera moves on quickly. But the death is real within the episode's logic, and what is interesting about it is the reversal. The helpless things being collected turn on the collector. The power dynamic inverts completely, and the show treats the death as a resolution rather than a problem. This begins a longer arc involving the ducks and their enemies, the geese, which will run through later seasons before concluding in a longer, later duck special. The duck collector's death is where that arc begins, with blood on the grass and the baby ducks having grown into something that could not be possessed. And then, later in Season 2, death arrives. Over the Top is the episode that changes everything about how regular show handles its supernatural mythology. The setup is Rigby cheating at arm wrestling against Skips, who in the park's hierarchy is the best at almost every physical challenge. Rigby beats Skips through a trick, a clever move that Skips did not see coming. Skips is enraged, not just annoyed, genuinely wounded in his pride. When they arm wrestle again, Skips slams Rigby down so hard that Rigby dies from the impact. This is Rigby's second death in Season 2, and unlike its time, the cause is not an act of abstract cosmic violence. Skips kills Rigby with his own hands. The person who is supposed to be the park's protector, the most capable and responsible person in the entire group, has in a moment of wounded pride, killed one of the two people he is most responsible for. The horror of this is not undercut by the show. Skips is genuinely devastated. He goes to death. Death in Over the Top is exactly what you would expect. British accented, sardonic, pleased with himself, in possession of Rigby's soul, and not particularly motivated to return it. He makes his offer. Arm wrestle him for the soul. If Skips wins, Rigby lives. If Death wins, Rigby is gone. The wager is Death's preferred mode of operation, the form he imposes on every negotiation, and it will define every subsequent interaction between him and the park crew. The arm wrestling match is where the episode becomes genuinely clever. Skips loses. He cannot beat Death outright. Death's right arm, trained for exactly this confrontation, is too strong. In desperation, Skips uses the same trick Rigby used on him earlier in the episode, the cheat that wounded his pride in the first place. He turns Rigby's deception into the tool that saves Rigby's life. Death's arm gives out. Rigby's soul is returned, restored to his body in a way that is characteristically undignified. The episode closes with Skips apologizing to Rigby, who wakes up not knowing he died. Skips chooses not to explain. He just says he is sorry for going too far. Rigby, who has no idea what the apology is actually about, accepts it, and the moment is allowed to be genuinely touching without the show announcing that it is touching. Skips has lived for centuries. He has seen death from every angle. He has now caused it accidentally and had to negotiate for its reversal by using the very trick that enraged him in the first place. The weight of that on a character who presents as stoic and self-sufficient is the emotional center of the episode, and it is handled with more care than a comedy show about arm wrestling with Death has any right to. This episode is the hinge. It establishes Death as a recurring figure. It makes Skip's relationship with Death part of the show's ongoing mythology, and it introduces the wager as the primary mechanism through which Death is negotiated in regular show. Almost every subsequent Death appearance will involve a competition, a bet, a soul on the table. The show found a form for its supernatural content and committed to it fully. The thing to understand about Season 2 as a whole is that it does not feel like a show that knows it is building mythology. Each death arrives as a standalone episode event, a contained consequence that resolves within its own runtime. And yet, looking back across the full run of the series, Season 2 is the foundation of everything. The two deaths that touch the main cast, Rigby dying in Its Time and dying again in Over the Top, establish the show's core emotional claim. That the friendships between these characters matter more than pride, more than winning, more than the short-term satisfaction of a jealous reaction or an angry retaliation. Mordecai kills Rigby because he cannot control his jealousy. Skips kills Rigby because he cannot control his pride. Both of them love Rigby. The deaths happen because love is not always enough to prevent damage. That framing is the show at its most honest. It is not saying that love saves people from harm. It is saying that even the people who love you most are capable of hurting you when they are operating from their worst selves. And then it says that the same love, when it is working correctly, is what drives Mordecai to reset time and drives Skips to arm wrestle Death. The two deaths are the show's earliest argument about what care actually looks like when it has to do something harder than feel good. GBF's death in High Score exists in a completely different register. It is not about love or friendship. It is about identity, specifically about what happens when someone builds their entire self on a single external achievement and cannot survive losing it. The universe record for Broken Bones is not just a score for Garrett Bobby Ferguson. It is the entire architecture of his self, and the show makes clear there is nothing underneath it. When Mordecai and Rigby break the record, there is nothing left to protect the self from, and the explosion is the logical conclusion. The detail about the wife stays with me. GBF did not just construct his identity around the record. He constructed a fictional personal life around it. A wife who never existed, perhaps to make the achievement seem more human, to give it the context of a life lived rather than a title held. He built a narrative in which he was a man with a history and a relationship, and then the record broke and the narrative collapsed, and the last true thing he said was an admission that the narrative was false. He died honest, which is more than he managed while alive. GBF's parody of real competitive gaming culture was clear from the character's first appearance, and the resonance of that parody has only sharpened in the years since the episode aired. The show did not predict any specific scandal. but it understood something about competitive identity, about the psychology of someone who cannot survive being surpassed, and it rendered that understanding as a giant floating head exploding in a burst of goo. Regular show was occasionally more perceptive about human behavior than its format seemed to require. Death's arrival in Over the Top also does something important with the visual and tonal grammar of the show. Before this episode, every supernatural threat in regular show is external to the park's social world. The Destroyer of Worlds was summoned from an arcade machine. The hot dogs were in a freezer. The zombies were under the cemetery. All of them required a specific triggering condition that put them in contact with the park crew. Death does not require a triggering condition. He was always there. He exists as a permanent feature of the landscape, not an intrusion into it. The season in which he appears is just the season where the right circumstances, Skip's killing Rigby in a moment of wounded pride, created direct contact. This is a meaningful reframing of what regular show's supernatural world actually is. Every threat in the first season and the early second season was something that could be avoided with better decisions. Do not connect the wires. Do not go into the freezer unsupervised. Do not put the film in the projector backwards. Death cannot be avoided with better decisions. He is the end of all decisions, and the show understanding that and making him a permanent recurring presence rather than a one-time villain is part of what gives the later seasons their particular weight. You cannot outrun him. You can only negotiate with him, and the show will spend the next 6 seasons showing you exactly what those negotiations look like and what they cost. There is also something worth observing about the specific emotional register Death occupies throughout the series, compared to other supernatural threats. The Destroyer of Worlds wanted to destroy. The hot dogs wanted revenge. The zombies were mindless and hungry. All of them are defined by appetite, by the desire to consume or unmake. Death is different. Death is not hungry for destruction. He is simply fulfilling a function, collecting what is owed, maintaining the system. His personality, the sardonic humor, the competitive streak, the domestic life with his wife and his oddly grown-up baby son Thomas, exists alongside the function rather than in service of it. He is not cruel. He is just thorough. This is part of what makes him the most interesting supernatural figure in the show. He is not evil. He is a professional who occasionally becomes personally invested in the outcomes of his work. The park crew getting in the way of that professionalism is a problem for him, the way a difficult account is a problem for anyone with a job to do. He is annoyed. He is competitive. He is willing to exploit advantages when he can find them. But he is not malicious in the way the other threats in the show are malicious. That distinction is what makes his eventual role in the finale legible. You can negotiate with a professional. You can even, eventually, end up on the same side as one. The third season of regular show is 39 episodes, beginning in September of 2011, and it is the season where Death stops being an occasional visitor and becomes something more like a recurring character. Not just in the literal sense, though Death himself appears multiple times, but in the sense that the show begins using Death to reveal character history in ways that matter to the ongoing story. Season 3 is where we learn things about the park crew that reframe everything we thought we knew about them. The season premiere is stick hockey, and it opens the season with one of the most disturbing deaths in the show's early run. The episode is centered on Benson, the gumball machine who manages the park, and specifically on why Benson refuses to play stick hockey, a game at which he was apparently once very skilled. The answer comes in a flashback. Benson had a student, an apprentice named Dave, whom he trained in stick hockey championships. Dave was decapitated by Chong, the villainous champion, using stick hockey sticks as weapons. Benson held Dave's severed head as Dave spoke his final words. The show delivers this with a certain matter-of-factness that is somehow worse than if it had played it dramatically. Benson's trauma is not the subject of an emotional breakdown or a slow reveal. It is shown in a flashback, efficiently, and the camera stays on Benson's face long enough to register that this event destroyed something in him. The loss of Dave is what turned stick hockey from a sport Benson loved into something he cannot look at without seeing his student's severed head. The episode handles this surprisingly well. It uses the death not as spectacle, but as backstory, as the explanation for a character's behavior that the audience has been accepting without question for 2 seasons. What I find genuinely affecting about this is that Benson's grief over Dave is never exploited for extended sentimentality. The show tells you what happened, shows you the cost of it on Benson's face, and moves on. The grief is treated as real and ongoing, and not something that needs to be resolved in a single episode. Benson will carry Dave with him for the rest of the series, even if Dave is never mentioned again. That is actually how grief works, and it is the kind of authentic emotional logic that regular show consistently found room for underneath its chaos. Skip Strikes arrives early in Season 3 and delivers the second major death appearance in the series. The park crew enters a bowling championship. Their opponents are the Magical Elements, a team whose lineup includes Death himself, along with Gary, a guardian of eternal youth, and a wizard. Death is not simply playing bowling, he is, typically, wagering souls. He makes a secret deal with Rigby. If the Magical Elements win, Death collects all the park employees' souls, and to ensure his team's victory, he blackmails Skips, threatening to reveal Skips' real name, Walks, unless Skips sits out the match. The revelation that Skips' actual name is Walks is significant information that the show is not yet ready to fully explain. It will not explain it until later, in the special that gives Skips his full backstory. For now, it is enough to know that the name is something Death can use as leverage, which tells you that the name means something painful to Skips, and that Death is aware of what it means and is perfectly willing to exploit it. This is Death at his most villainous. Not the supernatural force who collects souls as a function of the universe, but the petty, competitive being who will use whatever advantage he can find. Skips plays anyway. The show has established Skips as someone who will absorb enormous personal cost, rather than let the people around him suffer for his choices. He cannot let his friends' souls be wagered because of his own past. He plays, and the combined powers of the Magical Elements, Death's strength, the wizard's magic, and whatever the others bring to the match, cannot stop him. Skips wins. Death hands over his soul ball, which has been the prize on the line, and the park crew survives another supernatural encounter with their souls intact. The episode has done something important beyond the plot. It has confirmed that Death and Skips have a history that predates the events of Over the Top, that Death knows things about Skips' past that he is willing to use as weapons, and that Skips will endure personal humiliation and exposure rather than let the people he loves pay for his history. The arm wrestling match in Season 2 was the first round. The bowling match in Season 3 is the second. There will be more. Fists of Justice, which aired in the spring of 2012, is the episode that kills one of the Guardians of Eternal Youth. This is the most significant death of a named character in Season 3 up to this point, and it involves a figure from Skip's mythology. The Guardians of Eternal Youth are the beings who granted Skips his immortality. They are small, child-sized entities with enormous power, and they appear in Skips' story whenever Clorgbane the Destroyer returns to cause problems. Clorgbane is the villain who killed Mona, the woman Skips loved, and the Guardians empowered Skips specifically to fight Clorgbane every 157 years if he ever came back. In Fists of Justice, Clorgbane returns, and Skips has a hurt arm and cannot fight him. Mordecai and Rigby must use the Fists of Justice, a pair of gauntlets powerful enough to hurt Clorgbane, in Skips' place. During the battle, Clorgbane kills one of the Guardians. The death is quick and is not dwelt upon, but it is permanent. That Guardian does not come back. Their number is reduced by 1. In a show where most deaths are reversed or treated as transient, the death of a named, recurring figure who does not return carries a different weight. The Guardians gave Skips immortality because they valued life enough to fight for it. Now one of them is gone, killed by the very enemy that made the arrangement necessary. Mordecai and Rigby defeat Clorgbane using the Fists of Justice. The fallen Guardian stays dead. The show moves on, but not without acknowledging that something was lost that will not be recovered. Dead at 8, which aired in the summer of 2012, is the death episode that functions most explicitly as a comedy, while still advancing the show's mythology in important ways. Muscle Man nearly drowns on his own water slide, and Death arrives to collect his soul. Mordecai and Rigby, facing the prospect of Muscle Man's death, make a deal with Death. They will babysit his son Thomas for one night, and in exchange, Death will spare Muscle Man's soul. Thomas is much older than he looks, and behaves like an infant. He is enormous, capable of causing serious damage when upset, and deeply unpleasant to spend time with. The episode is essentially a babysitting comedy in which the baby is a supernatural terror. Mordecai and Rigby succeed. Death spares Muscle Man. And then, in a moment that the show files away for later use, Death delivers a prophecy. Muscle Man will die in a hot dog eating contest. This is a throwaway line at the end of a comedy episode, and it sounds like one. But regular show has the narrative discipline to mean it. The prophecy will come back. Season 3 is the season that establishes Death as a figure the park crew has an ongoing relationship with, rather than a one-time threat they defeated and moved on from. He appears in Skip Strikes. He is a background presence in the mythology of Clorgbane and the Guardians. He delivers the prophecy in Dead at 8. By the end of Season 3, Death is a recurring presence in the park crew's world, in a way that none of the other supernatural threats have achieved. The Destroyer of Worlds was defeated once. The hot dogs were defeated once. The zombies were defeated once. Death keeps coming back. This is the point. Death is not a villain to be defeated, but a force to be negotiated with, repeatedly, across the entire run of the show. You do not finish your relationship with Death, you maintain it. The wager mechanism that Death uses in every major appearance is worth thinking about more carefully than it might first seem. Death could simply take souls. He has the power to do so. The park crew demonstrates no ability to physically overpower him or to meaningfully threaten him. If he wanted Rigby's soul in Over the Top, he could have kept it. If he wanted the park crew's souls in Skip Strikes, he could have collected them without staging a bowling match. The wager is a choice, and the choice reveals something about Death's character. He is a gambler in the deepest sense, someone who finds the competition more interesting than the guaranteed outcome. He could win by default, and he prefers not to. He wants to beat Skips at something. He wants the victory to mean something, to be earned against real opposition. This makes Death paradoxically more humane than he appears. A Death who just takes souls without ceremony is purely terrifying. A Death who makes wagers, who has a personality, who gets annoyed when he loses and who trains his arms specifically to beat a rival at arm wrestling, is someone you can negotiate with. He is someone who has preferences and who will honor the terms of a bet, because the bet is the point. The park crew's survival across all their encounters with Death depends on this quality, on the fact that he is not simply a force, but a personality, and personalities can be managed if you understand what motivates them. What motivates Death is competition, specifically the desire to beat Skips. This is the subtext of every Death appearance, even the ones that seem unrelated to Skips directly. The Dead at 8 babysitting deal is nominally about Muscle Man's soul, but it keeps Skips in the background of the episode's mythology. Death knows Skips. He chose to make the deal with Mordecai and Rigby rather than with Skips specifically, one reads, because dealing with Skips means risking another loss, and Death has already lost to Skips twice and is not eager to make it 3. Mordecai and Rigby are easier marks. The park crew's victories against Death are almost always enabled by the fact that Death underestimates them, sees them as lesser threats than Skips, and does not prepare adequately for what they are actually capable of. The prophecy Death delivers about Muscle Man, that he will die in a hot dog eating contest, is the show demonstrating that Death's relationship with the park crew is ongoing enough to involve prediction. He does not just collect, he observes. He knows enough about Muscle Man's character to foresee that impulsiveness in the context of food competition will eventually put Muscle Man in a situation where Death can collect the debt. The prophecy is an investment, and Last Meal in Season 4 is the moment when Death tries to collect the return. That he fails again is consistent with everything the show has established about Death's relationship with the park crew. They keep surviving through a combination of stubbornness, love for each other, and the specific quality of not behaving the way a rational being might be expected to behave when their soul is on the table. Death's arc across Seasons 2, 3, and 4, from the figure who arrives to collect Rigby's soul to the figure who delivers prophecies about hot dog contests, is the arc of someone becoming familiar with a particular group of people and developing, against his own preferences perhaps, a grudging form of respect for them. He keeps wagering, he keeps losing, he keeps coming back. The show never explains why he continues to offer wagers rather than simply claiming what he could claim by force. But the implication is there. He finds them interesting. They keep doing things he did not anticipate. For a being who has been collecting souls since before the show's oldest characters were alive, novelty must be extraordinarily rare, and the park crew offers it in quantity. The Season 3 Halloween special, Terror Tales of the Park, aired in October of 2011, and introduced a storytelling format the show would use for its Halloween specials throughout the entire series. The characters gather and take turns telling horror stories, and the deaths within those stories are explicitly non-canonical, contained within the framing of in-universe fiction. Characters die in the stories, sometimes wholesale, and it does not affect the main continuity because the stories are stories. The first segment of Terror Tales of the Parkway is called In the House, and it involves a vengeful Halloween wizard who curses Mordecai, Rigby, and the others for egging his house. He turns Rigby into a house. He kills the other main characters one by one. The segment builds toward what appears to be a straightforward horror conclusion, and then the show reveals that Rigby is actually the wizard, that he has been telling the story and is therefore the author of everything that happened in it. He breaks the fourth wall to wish the audience a happy Halloween. Within the non-canonical space of the Terror Tales format, the show can do things it cannot do in the main narrative. Characters can be killed permanently within a segment. They can be aged to dust, transformed, destroyed. The deaths do not cost anything narratively because they exist outside the main story, but they reveal something about what the show is capable of when the constraints are loosened, and the In the House segment is willing to show the main cast dying in ways the main show would not allow. The horror is genuine, the comedy is genuine, and the fact that none of it counts does not entirely diffuse either quality. Season 4 begins on October 1st, 2012, and its premiere is one of the most ambitious single episodes in the show's run. Exit 9B is essentially a greatest hits death reel. Every villain who died or was defeated in the first 3 seasons is literally resurrected and redeployed, all at once, and then killed again. The mechanism is GBF's son, Garrett Bobby Ferguson Jr. Jr. has built a portal at Exit 9B, specifically to revive the dead villains his father died alongside, to get revenge on the park crew who defeated all of them. The portal works. Zombies from the earlier zombie episode, the Night Owl, the Urge from Trash Boat, the Hot Dogs from Meet Your Maker, the Hammer, the Blonde Men, the Destroyer of Worlds, Susan, and GBF himself, all of them come back through the portal. The park fills with every major threat from the first 3 seasons, active and operational and furious. The resolution comes not through combat, but through paperwork. The park's official status as a protected location requires a petition with enough signatures to be legally binding. When the petition is completed, the portal reverses, and all the revived villains are sucked back through it into the afterlife. They die again. GBF Sr., in his final moment before vanishing, is visibly disappointed in his son. This episode is the show's self-aware engagement with its own history. By killing all the villains again, in sequence, it acknowledges that what it has been building across 3 seasons is an actual continuity, a graveyard of defeated antagonists whose removal from the story was permanent and whose return is therefore meaningful. The deaths in this episode are not just plot mechanics. They are the show saying out loud that death in regular show means something, that the resolution of an episode is not just narrative closure, but a genuine ending for whoever was defeated in it. The Season 4 Halloween special, Terror Tales of the Park 2, contains 2 segments that handle death with more sophistication than anything in the first Terror Tales. The segment called Payback puts Mordecai in a story about accidentally killing his uncle Steve. Steve's tie gets caught in a bowling ball return machine, while Mordecai dances in excitement. Steve is pulled in and killed. His ghost then haunts Mordecai throughout the story, and the tension builds toward what appears to be supernatural vengeance. But the twist is that Steve simply wants to return the $5 he borrowed from Mordecai before he died. He has been haunting Mordecai not in anger, but in a kind of anxious guilt. He owed Mordecai money, and death prevented him from paying it back, and it has been bothering him ever since. This is one of my favorite things the show does. It takes the horror framework seriously enough to build genuine dread, and then it resolves the dread not with a punchline, but with something human. Steve's ghost wanted closure not because he was angry, but because he was honest. He owed a debt, he paid it, he moved on. The segment is funny, but the emotional logic underneath it is real, and the comedy does not diminish it. The second major segment, Party Bus, is darker. Margaret narrates a story in which a supernatural party bus ages its riders rapidly. Mordecai, Rigby, Eileen, and Margaret themselves age from young adults to elderly to skeletons to infants and finally vanish entirely. Mordecai reverses the aging, but he reverses it too far, and they de-age into nothingness. The driver of the bus is revealed to be a skeleton under bandages. The segment ends in total extinction for the characters within it. Within the Terror Tales frame, this is permissible. These are characters telling stories to each other, and in their stories, anyone can die. But Party Bus is the show's most explicit engagement with the idea of aging as a kind of death, with time as the force that takes people from you. And even within the non-canonical frame, watching cartoon versions of characters you have come to care about turn to bones and then to nothing lands with a specific quality. The segment knows what it is doing. Last Meal, which aired in the summer of 2013, is the fulfillment of a promise the show made in Dead at 8. Death prophesied that Muscle Man would die in a hot dog eating contest. In Last Meal, a hot dog eating contest materializes, and Muscle Man enters it before he is supposed to start a diet. His entry is impulsive and stupid, and entirely consistent with Muscle Man's character. Death appears as his opponent. The wager this time is Muscle Man's soul, placed against the outcome of the contest. Death is, as always, supremely confident in his own victory. He has the advantage of supernatural endurance, if nothing else, and he has arranged this contest to fulfill the prophecy that he himself delivered. The structure of the episode positions Death as a predestined winner, but Muscle Man, who has always been a character defined by a kind of cheerful, stubborn persistence, narrowly wins. Death is cheated of the soul a third time. The prophecy resolves without the death it predicted. What is worth noting about this is the show's consistency. A throwaway line in a Season 3 comedy episode about babysitting a demon infant becomes a fully realized Season 4 plot. The show trusted its own mythology enough to return to a detail that most productions would have forgotten. That trust in its own continuity is part of what makes regular shows' mythology feel more substantial than you might expect from a show about a park and two slackers who cannot mow the lawn on time. The rest of Season 4 continues to develop the show's relationships and mythology without adding significantly to the death count in ways that were not already established. The park crew faces threats, resolves them, and moves deeper into the character dynamics that will eventually carry the show into its final chapters. Going through the full catalog of regular show deaths means sitting with the Terror Tales format long enough to appreciate what it contributes to the show's relationship with mortality across all of its installments. The Halloween specials are not incidental to that mythology. They are the space where the show can explore death without consequence, and what it explores in that space tells you something about what it wishes it could say in the main narrative. The first Terror Tales special introduced the format in Season 3 with 3 segments. The most significant is In the House, in which a vengeful Halloween wizard curses the park crew for egging his house and systematically kills the main characters one by one. The kills are horror comedy, fast and dark, and the show does not soften them. The twist that Rigby is actually the wizard, that the horror story was being authored by one of its apparent victims, works because the segment earned it by being genuinely menacing first. Within the non-canonical space, the show can kill everyone, and it does. The twist does not undo the deaths within the segment's logic so much as it reframes who was responsible for them. Rigby, as the author of a story in which he survives and everyone else dies, is doing something characteristically Rigby, making himself the center of a narrative, the last one standing, the one with the power. The Terror Tales frame lets the show take that impulse to its darkest logical conclusion. Creepy Doll, the second Terror Tales segment, belongs to Pops and involves a doll named Percy with a grudge. It is the lightest of the 3 segments, leaning toward comedy rather than genuine fright. But there is something in the image of Pops being pursued by something from his past, something that wants to harm him over an old slight, that connects to what the show will eventually reveal about Pops's cosmic destiny without the segment making the connection. The gentle man being targeted by forces he did not intend to harm is Pops's story on a smaller and funnier scale, and the Terror Tales format lets the show sketch that figure without committing to the full emotional weight. The Terror Tales in Season 4 handles the other end of the emotional spectrum, staging stories of aging, absurd death, and cosmic mistake that push the anthology further into the space between comedy and horror. Within the Terror Tales frame, this is permissible, but the segment about aging in particular is the show's most explicit engagement with time as the force that takes people from you. And even within the non-canonical frame, it lands with a specific quality. Watching cartoon versions of characters you have spent 2 seasons caring about turn to bones and then to nothing does not stop being uncomfortable just because you know one of them is telling the story. The frame does not fully contain the feeling. The show knows this, and it chooses to end the segment with total extinction anyway, because that is the truth the segment is interested in. Time does not negotiate. Time does not make wagers. Time is the one force in regular show's universe that operates without a personality, without a face you can argue with, without a competition you can win if you are clever enough. The Party Bus segment is the show acknowledging what it usually avoids acknowledging directly. The middle segment of the third Terror Tales special involves the park crew accidentally destroying the head of a scarecrow's wife and dealing with the scarecrow's grief-fueled vengeance. The scarecrow acts out of love for someone who was destroyed by carelessness, and the segment plays this straight within the horror framework. There is something in the image of a monster acting out of love for someone gone that connects to the show's broader themes without the segment announcing the connection. By season 5, the show has already told you Skips' story, has already shown you what someone does with grief that has nowhere to go. The Scarecrow's rampage reads as a horror register version of the same thing. Grief in regular show is always dangerous. It is what gave Skips immortality. It is what makes the Scarecrow murderous. The show understands that loss creates forces that cannot be controlled once they are set in motion, and the Terror Tales specials are the space where it can show you what that looks like at its most extreme. The Terror Tales segment, Unfinished Business, is the best single segment in the Halloween anthology, and it works because it takes the one thing the audience trusts about the show, that the main characters will survive, and uses that trust to set up the inversion. The assumption that Mordecai and Rigby are the dead ones is established in the segment's opening and is consistent enough with ghost story conventions that it takes several minutes before the audience begins to suspect the twist. Benson as the ghost, unable to move on because his job is unfinished, is the segment's emotional payload, and it is delivered without sentimentality. The scene in which Mordecai and Rigby formally fire their dead boss, completing the paperwork that releases him from his obligation to the park, is played as comedy and works as comedy. But the show does not pretend that firing your dead boss is not also a farewell. The comedy and the sadness occupy exactly the same space, and neither one is asking permission from the other. What Unfinished Business says about Benson's character is the truest thing any episode says about him. He is a figure defined by his function, by having responsibility and authority and a purpose within a structure he understands. He has spent 8 seasons yelling at Mordecai and Rigby because failing to do his job means failing to be himself. A death that leaves him unable to move on because his job is unfinished is the logical endpoint of that character trait, and the show finds it funny and genuinely sad at the same time. The funniness does not mean the sadness is not real. Both are. The final Terror Tales specials, in the later seasons, maintain the anthology format's quality without introducing anything structurally new. By season 8, the characters telling horror stories are, in the main narrative, heading toward a genuinely permanent tragedy. The park crew, now in space and aware of what is coming with antipops, still takes time to scare each other with stories. The show does not make this ironic or self-aware. It simply lets the tradition continue, which is its own statement about how these characters live with danger. They keep doing the things they do together even when everything is on the line, because those shared rituals are what makes the time between crises worth having. The Terror Tales specials are, among other things, a record of the park crew being alive and present with each other, telling stories in the dark, finding the comedy in death because that is how they survive, knowing it is always close. Season 5 of regular show is where the show decides to explain Skips, not just what he is or what he can do, but who he was before the show started, before the park, before the immortality. The episode is called Skip's Story, and it aired in the spring of 2014 as a half-hour special, and it is one of the most emotionally complete episodes the show ever produced. The backstory revealed in Skip's story is this. Skips was not always called Skips. His name was Walks. He was a teenager, and he was in love with a young woman named Mona, whose full name was Desdemona. The way they are drawn together in this episode is gentle and specific. They both love to skip together, literally skip, as in the childhood locomotion, and Mona is the one who calls him that first. Skips. It is her name for him, a private name, a term of affection. At prom, Clorgbane the Destroyer arrives. He had fought the Guardians of Eternal Youth before, and he is there to fight them again. During the confrontation, Clorgbane hits the wall with his mace, and the impact causes the ceiling to collapse. The ceiling comes down on Mona. She is killed. The death of Mona is the single event that explains everything about Skips. Why he is immortal. Why he still goes by the name she gave him. Why he fights Clorgbane every 157 years when Clorgbane returns. The Guardians of Eternal Youth offered Walks immortality, not as a gift but as a function. Someone needs to be capable of fighting Clorgbane across the span of time, and Walks has both the capability and the motivation. He renamed himself Skips to keep Mona with him in the only way still available to him. He skips everywhere he goes, in every episode of the show, because skipping is the thing she called him after. The thing they did together. The last piece of her that did not die with her. This is the part that actually gets me, years later. The show had been using the skipping as a visual gag for 5 seasons. He is an immortal Yeti who skips instead of walking, and the absurdity of it is built into the character from the beginning. Then Skips' story reveals that the absurdity is grief. That every time Skips moves across the screen in his characteristic skip, he is carrying a loss that is centuries old. The comedy was always the tragedy wearing a different face, and the show had the patience to wait until season 5 to say so. Mona's death in Skips' story is handled with a restraint that earns the emotion it creates. The episode does not use her death to make you cry through spectacle. It is quick, the ceiling comes down, and then she is gone, and the camera stays on Walks' face. The grief is in his stillness. The show trusts that you understand what you are seeing without needing it spelled out. The Season 5 Terror Tales special, Terror Tales of the Park 3, continues the Halloween anthology format, with segments including Killer Bed, in which Rigby's new bed is a murderous entity, and additional horror stories from the rest of the cast. These segments, as always, exist outside the main continuity, and the deaths within them serve the horror framework without affecting the ongoing story. By Season 5, the format is well established. The Terror Tales specials are where the show can let its horror sensibility run further than it normally would, and the deaths within them are proportionally more extreme. What Season 5 does overall is deepen the emotional foundation of the show without dramatically advancing the death count. The Mona backstory is the season's most significant contribution to the show's mythology of loss, and it does more work than any action sequence could. It takes a visual gag that has been running for 5 years and reframes it as something quietly devastating. And in doing so, it demonstrates what kind of show regular show actually is when it decides to stop being funny for a moment. The depth of Skip's story cannot be overstated in terms of what it does for the show's mythology. The episode is a half-hour special, longer than a standard installment, and it uses that extra time to give the backstory the breathing room it needs. Mona's death is not the dramatic apex of the episode so much as its emotional center of gravity, the fixed point around which everything in Walks' life has been orbiting since it happened, and everything in Skips' existence for as long as the show has known him. Clorgbane the Destroyer, the villain responsible for Mona's death, is treated by the show with consistent seriousness. He is not a one-time threat, but a recurring one, returning every 157 years as the terms of his arrangement with the Guardians dictate. The specificity of that number is the show doing something it does throughout its run, making the magical systems feel real by giving them arbitrary, non-round measurements. A villain who returns every 150 years would feel like a fairy tale convention. A villain who returns every 157 years feels like a fact, like something someone actually measured and recorded over long enough time to know. This specificity is how the show's mythology stays grounded even when its content is completely fantastical. The Guardians of Eternal Youth themselves are figures who combine absurdity with genuine authority. They look like children. They are immensely powerful. They granted Skips immortality because they needed someone capable of fighting Clorgbane across the span of time, and they understood that Walks had both the capability and the motivation. What this means, underneath the mythology, is that Skips' immortality was not a gift. It was a job offer, extended at the worst possible moment, to someone who had just lost the only thing that made mortality bearable. The Guardians gave him eternal life because they needed a weapon, and Walks accepted it because he had nothing else to do with the pain. Every time Skips appears in the show and does something that seems like competence or wisdom or the unflappable calm of someone who has seen everything, this backstory is underneath it. He has seen everything. He has been alive for long enough that most ordinary experiences have become things he can observe and assist with, rather than things he can fully feel himself. He helps Mordecai with his romantic problems because he has watched enough of those to know how they tend to go. He is the person the others turn to when something needs fixing because he has been in enough situations like it to know the range of outcomes. His competence is what centuries of grief transformed him into. The name, the skipping. These are the details that stay with me long after the episode. Mona called him Skips because they skipped together, a completely ordinary, slightly childish mode of locomotion that became theirs in the way small shared behaviors become owned by the people who share them. When he renamed himself after her death, he was not making a grand gesture. He was holding on to the smallest possible thing, the thing that cost nothing and meant everything. Then he skipped everywhere for the rest of eternity, and every episode of the show in which Skips crosses the screen is him carrying that grief in that particular shape. The comedy of the visual, an enormous immortal yeti doing the locomotion of a 6-year-old, was always grief wearing the only costume still available to it. Season 5 also confirms something important about immortality in the show's universe. It is not protection from external harm. The guardians of eternal youth, who granted Skips his immortality, can themselves be killed, as the earlier Fists of Justice death demonstrated. The implication is that what the Guardians gave Skips is protection from aging, from the ordinary passage of time, not from every possible form of destruction. He will not die the way Mona died, from an accident of matter moving in ways it should not. But there are forces in the universe capable of ending him. Clorgbane may be one of them. This is what makes the 157-year cycle so specifically frightening for Skips. He is immortal and he still has to fight something that might be able to kill him, indefinitely. He cannot age out of the obligation. He cannot be too old or too weakened to show up. The immortality offered as a means to fulfill the obligation might also be the thing that chains him to it forever. The show does not state this explicitly, but the reading is there. Skips was given eternal life, not as a reward, but as an assignment. And the assignment is grief maintenance across the span of centuries. The other dimension of Season 5 worth dwelling on is what it does for the show's treatment of love as a theme. Before Season 5, the show's romantic content was largely comedic. Mordecai's long, stumbling attempts to connect with Margaret, the running joke of his paralysis in the face of his own feelings. Skips's story is the first time the show takes romantic love and presents it as genuinely irreversible loss, as something that shapes a person permanently, rather than resolving or fading over time. Skips has been in love with Mona for centuries. He will be in love with Mona for centuries more. The immortality that keeps him alive also keeps the loss fresh in a way that mortal grief eventually tempers. This is not presented as beautiful. It is presented as the cost of the deal he accepted. This complicates how you read every subsequent Death appearance. Death and Skips have a rivalry, and the show positions that rivalry as ego and competition. As two stubborn figures who keep meeting across centuries in contests neither can entirely win. Underneath the competition is this. Skips accepted immortality specifically to fight someone who killed the person he loved. Every time Skips faces death in a wager, the wager is not really about souls or bowling or the park crew's safety. It is about Skips's refusal to lose anyone else the way he lost Mona. He arm wrestles death for Rigby's life because he already knows what it costs to lose someone, and he will not pay that price again if he can prevent it. Death keeps losing to Skips because he keeps underestimating how much Skips has at stake. Season 6 of regular show began in the autumn of 2014 and continued through the summer of 2015. It is the season that plays one of its most emotionally effective tricks on the audience by staging an elaborate fake death for a character and then using the audience's expectation of death to produce the opposite. The end of Muscle Man thread in Season 6 is a multi-episode arc in which Muscle Man announces to the park crew that the end is coming for him and that he wants to spend his remaining time doing the things that matter most to him. The show stages this with all the trappings of a death arc. The character making peace with his relationships, visiting the places that matter to him, saying the things he has been putting off. Mordecai and Rigby become increasingly alarmed. The audience is positioned to accept that this is actually happening, that the show is going to kill Muscle Man. It is not. Muscle Man is not dying. He is getting married to Starla. The things he wanted to do before the end were pre-wedding rituals, and the end, he announced, was the end of his life as a single man. The arc is a sustained misdirection that works because the show has established death as a real possibility within its world. You believe the fake death because you have seen real deaths. The trick is only possible because the show has earned the audience's willingness to believe it might go there. The relief when the truth is revealed is genuine, and it says something interesting about the audience's relationship with these characters by season 6. 4 seasons earlier, nobody would have assumed the show was actually going to kill Muscle Man in a serious way. By season 6, after Dead at 8 and Last Meal, and everything the show has built around mortality and souls and death as a recurring figure, the possibility feels real. The show has cultivated that possibility deliberately, and it uses it here to produce joy instead of grief. The season 6 Halloween special, Terror Tales of the Park Farve, is the most structurally inventive of the anthology episodes. The segment, Unfinished Business, sets up what appears to be a ghost story in which Mordecai and Rigby are haunting the park house after their deaths. The audience is positioned to assume they are the dead ones. The twist: it is Benson who died. He fell off a ladder hanging Halloween decorations, and his ghost has been lingering in the house while Mordecai and Rigby, very much alive, try to figure out what is happening. To make Benson's ghost move on, they have to officially fire him from his job, which is the piece of unresolved earthly business that is keeping him stuck. This is the show's best use of the Terror Tales format. The ghost story framework is used to deliver a genuine emotional beat about Benson's character. That his identity is so tied to his role as the park manager, to having responsibility and authority and a job to do, that even in death he cannot leave until that job is officially ended. The segment is funny and strange, and genuinely affecting, and it uses the non-canonical space to explore something true about Benson that the main narrative does not have room for. The larger duck and geese arc, which began with the duck collector's death in season 2, continues to build in the later seasons and eventually concludes in a longer, duck and geese-focused regular show special that the show sold as a kind of event episode. The deaths involved are consistent with the show's approach to its recurring villain arcs. They are complete, they feel earned, and the long arc gives them more weight than an isolated episode could provide. The baby ducks that Mordecai and Rigby found in a fountain in season 2 have become something that does not need protecting anymore, and the fight they take up on their own is one the show is comfortable letting them win without any help from the humans in the park. It is a small argument about the way things that were once helpless grow into things that can act on their own behalf, and the show is glad to make it in the middle of a cartoon fight sequence. Regular show. The movie had its theatrical premiere in August of 2015, played select screens across the country, and arrived on Cartoon Network in November of that year. It runs a little over an hour and exists in its own narrative space, largely separate from the main series, depicting an alternate future timeline that is ultimately erased by events in the film itself. The movie's premise involves Mordecai and Rigby discovering that their history together is more significant than they realized. A high school volleyball coach named Mr. Ross once oversaw a science project by teenage Mordecai and Rigby that accidentally created a time machine. The machine produced something called a timonado, a tornado that travels through time and space, and Ross was so damaged by the consequences of this that he spent decades becoming Lord Ross, a villain in the future timeline who hunts the park crew with the intention of erasing the timeline entirely. In the future that Mordecai and present Rigby visit, Lord Ross has killed nearly everyone. Future Benson is dead. Future Skips is dead. Future High Five Ghost is dead. Future Muscle Man is dead. Future Pops is dead. Lord Ross has systematically eliminated the park crew one by one. The future Mordecai has become a cybernetic soldier, hardened by grief and loss. The future Rigby is still alive, still himself, still fighting. Then future Rigby is shot by future Mordecai. It happens while they are trying to escape via a time ship, and future Mordecai fires on future Rigby in a moment that the film frames as a kind of mercy, or a sacrifice of the only remaining connection to his old life, in service of ensuring present Mordecai can survive and change the past. The details of exactly how and why this happens are complicated by the film's time travel mechanics, but the emotional core of it is this. Future Mordecai has become someone who would kill his best friend, and the film shows you that transformation as the cost of the grief and violence he has absorbed across years of fighting Lord Ross alone. Future Mordecai's own death comes when he sacrifices himself to save present Mordecai. The image of future Mordecai dying to protect his present self counterpart is the film's emotional climax. It is a character who has become unreachable, saving the version of himself that still has the chance to be something different. Because present Mordecai and Rigby repair their friendship and alter the past, the future timeline in which all of these deaths occurred is erased. Lord Ross is not killed but is captured in the past before he can become what he became. The future Benson, Skips, High Five Ghost, Muscle Man, Pops, Rigby, and Mordecai, who died in that timeline, are not restored exactly. They simply never died in the corrected version of events. The deaths are real within the film's logic, and are erased by the film's resolution, which is a version of the show's usual approach to mortality, applied on a larger scale. What the movie adds to the show's death mythology is the image of the future the park crew would have without each other. Lord Ross's campaign against them is only possible because the friendship at the center of the show broke down, because Mordecai and Rigby stopped being the kind of friends who would fix things for each other. The film makes explicit what the main series implies, that the relationships between these characters are what hold the universe in place, and that the alternative is a future where everyone is dead and the only remaining figure is a grief-worn version of Mordecai who has forgotten how to be himself. This is the argument the movie makes, and it makes it through deaths that are then erased, which is exactly the kind of move the show has always made. The deaths are real. The emotions they produce are real. The characters who died do not come back in the way we usually mean, but the timeline that contained them is corrected, which is not quite the same as a resurrection, and not quite the same as a loss. It is the show's most ambitious engagement with mortality as a structural element of storytelling, and it does it in the space of a feature film. The alternate timeline deaths in the movie have a specific quality that differs from every other death in the show's run. They are deaths that happen to characters you actually know, not strangers or background figures or minor villains. The park crew. Future Benson is still Benson. Future Skips is still Skips, which means he is still carrying Mona, which means Lord Ross killed a person who has already survived the worst thing that could happen to him and kept going for centuries. When the film kills Future Skips, it is not killing an unfamiliar character. It is ending an immortal. The decision to destroy the entire future park crew before the film has properly started is a narrative risk. It front-loads all the emotional cost into the opening act and then asks you to invest in a timeline reversal that will undo those deaths. This only works if the deaths felt real while they were happening, and they do, because 5 seasons of relationship with these characters means that seeing their futures destroyed carries genuine impact even within the knowledge that the timeline will be corrected. Regular show has trained you to take death seriously, and then it uses that training against you in the opening minutes of its feature film. Future Mordecai's sacrifice, dying to protect present Mordecai, is the film's emotional climax, and it is the film's argument about what is worth saving. Future Mordecai has become someone unrecognizable, grief-hardened, cybernetic, isolated by years of fighting alone in a timeline where everyone was killed and where the friendship that defined him dissolved. He is what remains of Mordecai when all the things that make Mordecai himself are removed by loss. He is not exactly a villain, but he is not the character the show is about either. He exists in the space between them, which is the most interesting space the movie finds. His decision to die for his present self-counterpart is the decision to protect the version of Mordecai that still has something to lose. Present Mordecai still has Rigby, still has the chance to be the person future Mordecai stopped being. Future Mordecai cannot get any of that back for himself, but he can make sure the other version does not lose it. The sacrifice is not about love exactly, or not only about love. It is about the recognition that some things, once lost, cannot be recovered, and that the only meaningful action left is preventing the loss from happening again. Lord Ross does not die in the film. He is stopped in the past before he can become the villain who kills the park crew. This is the film's most explicitly optimistic gesture. The argument that the villain was not inevitable, that the circumstances that created him were changeable, that going back far enough to prevent the conditions of villainy is more valuable than defeating the villain who emerged from them. The show's usual approach to antagonists is to defeat them, often permanently. The movie's approach is to make the defeat unnecessary. This is a different and more hopeful logic, and it reflects something true about the film's underlying argument. The future is not fixed. The choices you make with the people you love in the present are what the future is actually made of. Season 7 of regular show ran from the summer of 2015 through the summer of 2016. It is the season that begins moving the show into its final configuration, setting up the space arc that would define Season 8 and bringing the emotional stakes of the series to a point where the finale becomes legible as an inevitable destination. The Season 7 episode, The Dome Experiment, is a lesser-known entry in the show's death catalog. A group of scientists who call themselves the Dome Scientists implement an experiment that traps the park and everyone in it under a large dome. The experiment is overseen by a figure referred to in the episode as Dr. Dome, who is not simply conducting research, but is willing to eliminate anyone who threatens the project's continuation. Several Dome scientists are killed in the course of the episode, dispatched through a combination of accident and deliberate violence. These are not the show's most emotionally resonant deaths. They are side characters, figures whose existence is defined by the episode's threat, and they are gone when the episode ends. But they contribute to the show's growing willingness in its later seasons to let things end without reversal, to let the world of the park be a place where not everything that is lost comes back. The Season 7 Terror Tales special continues the anthology format. The show is consistent about including a Halloween special in every season, and by Season 7 the format is comfortable enough that it can accommodate more variety in tone and structure within individual segments. The deaths within these segments remain non-canonical, contained within the storytelling frame of characters telling each other horror stories, and they serve the horror tradition the show is honoring, rather than the ongoing narrative. What Season 7 is building toward, underneath its individual episode plots, is the context for what happens in Season 8. The park crew is established as a chosen group, as people whose relationship to each other and to the park is not accidental, but part of a larger cosmic pattern that they do not yet fully understand. The show is laying the ground for Pops' story, the reveal that the gentle, lollipop-shaped man who has lived among them for the entire series is something far more significant than he appears, and that the people who have been his friends and co-workers have been, in a sense, fulfilling a destiny alongside him without knowing it. Season 7 does more work than its position in the show's timeline might suggest. It is not a transitional season in the dismissive sense, not filler between the character building of the middle seasons and the finale of Season 8. It is the season that completes the emotional architecture of each major character relationship before the show begins asking those relationships to carry the weight of the ending. Every friendship and every dynamic that will matter in the finale is fully drawn by the time Season 7 ends. The Dome scientists who die in the Dome experiment are worth thinking about in the context of what the show has become by Season 7. The early seasons could use background deaths as atmosphere, the consequence of a supernatural threat that the main cast then defeated. By Season 7, the show's relationship with its own mythology is sophisticated enough that even minor villain deaths carry context from everything that came before. The Dome scientists are not given the emotional development that Dave or Mona received, but they die in a show that has trained you to take death seriously, and so their deaths register differently than the party guests in Just Set Up the Chairs. The show has taught you how to receive this. The Dome experiment is also the show's most direct engagement with the idea of institutional violence, of people in positions of authority doing terrible things because the structure insulates them from consequences. Dr. Dome is not a demon or a figure from another dimension. He is a researcher in a bureaucratic structure, and the violence that occurs within that structure is more bureaucratic than supernatural. This is a different moral universe from the one in which death makes wagers and Clorgbane returns on a schedule. It is a more recognizable moral universe, and in some ways a more disturbing one. Season 7 also does significant work on the show's most durable relationship, the friendship between Mordecai and Rigby, which has been tested and repaired and tested again across 6 previous seasons. The movie made explicit what was always implied, that the future in which Mordecai and Rigby stop being friends is the future in which everyone dies. Season 7 takes that argument and grounds it back in the ordinary friction of two people who have known each other too long and too well, and still choose each other. When they disagree in Season 7, the stakes of that disagreement have been made legible by the movie. The show uses that legibility without announcing it. The revelation that the ancient wall panels in Season 8 show previous versions of the park crew's companions fighting alongside previous versions of Pops reframes Season 7 in retrospect. If Mordecai and Rigby and the others have existed in analogous forms across multiple cosmic resets, then Season 7 is not just the penultimate season of a television show. It is the penultimate chapter of a story that has been told many times before, with different figures in the same roles, always ending the same way until now. The Season 7 park crew, dealing with their episode's threats and complications, are the latest iteration of a pattern the universe has been repeating, and they have no idea. This is a genuinely ambitious idea to find underneath a cartoon about slackers. Most shows would make this revelation the center of a dramatic confrontation. Regular Show buries it in an episode in Season 8 and lets the audience sit with the implication. The park crew never fully grasps what the old wall panels mean, not with the full weight of all those iterations. The show suggests this might be the point. That what makes this iteration different is not that the companions understand their cosmic role, but that they love each other in a way that is specific and personal, and not reducible to mythology. Previous iterations fought alongside previous Popses and lost. This iteration throws Pops a party. The space setting of Season 8 is important not just as a change of scenery, but as a statement about where the show is emotionally. The park on Earth was always the defended position, the place where the characters were rooted, and where supernatural intrusions arrived from somewhere else. In space, the park travels toward the source of the intrusion. The crew is moving from the familiar toward the thing that has always been coming for them. The show uses this spatial shift to mark an emotional one. By Season 8, the characters have run out of things to protect themselves from knowing. They know what is coming. They are moving toward it on purpose. That choice, made collectively, is the show's last argument before the finale makes it explicit. Streaming's destruction in the final battle, through the combined efforts of Gary, a statue's elbow drop, and the shockwaves of HD DVD and Blu-ray, is characteristic of the show's approach to villain resolutions. The defeat mechanism is specific and slightly absurd, involving elements from the show's broader mythology, and the show commits to it fully, rather than apologizing for the specificity. The elbow drop from a statue is funny. The shockwaves of two competing disc formats are funny. The show knows they are funny, and it does not let that knowledge undercut the moment. This is Regular Show's consistent formal achievement. It can occupy comedy and consequence simultaneously, without letting either one cancel the other. Season 8 of Regular Show is titled Regular Show in Space, and it aired from the autumn of 2016 to January of 2017. It is the final season, and it is the season in which the show finally turns to face what it has been building toward and allows the consequences to be permanent. Everything the earlier seasons rehearsed with wagers and reversals is, in the last stretch, allowed to be real. The space arc begins when the park itself is launched into orbit to protect it from the approaching threat of anti-Pops, Pops' evil twin brother, and the villain called Streaming. The shift in setting, from a municipal park on Earth to a park dome floating through outer space, is also a shift in the show's relationship to mortality. In the earlier seasons, the supernatural threats that visited the park were intrusions from elsewhere. In Season 8, the park crew are the ones who have traveled to the place where the final confrontation will happen. They have left the familiar behind. Streaming is the most visible villain of Season 8's build to the finale. He is Anti-Pops' primary henchman, and over the course of the season he becomes progressively more dangerous, eventually merging with his minions to increase his power. His destruction in the final battle involves a combination of Gary, a statue's elbow drop, and the combined shockwaves of HD DVD and Blu-ray, two figures in the show's broader mythology who represent dueling technologies. Whatever remains of Streaming after this is erased entirely when Anti-Pops reaches his Titan form. Streaming's death is the show's last villain elimination before the finale proper, the final obstacle cleared before the central confrontation. Anti-Pops himself is a figure the show has been preparing for since it introduced the idea of Pops having a cosmic destiny. His full name, as the show tells it, is Malum Cranus, and he was born on the planet Lollyland alongside Pops. Their purpose is ancient and cyclical. Anti-Pops is the embodiment of destruction. Pops is the embodiment of pure good. And every time they have met across previous iterations of the universe, they have fought to a stalemate, and the stalemate has destroyed and reset everything. The show reveals, through visual evidence in the park's ancient wall records, that previous versions of Pops' companions have existed across multiple cosmic resets, each time fighting alongside a version of Pops, each time failing to break the cycle. This is a genuinely ambitious idea for a Cartoon Network show. The park crew are not just friends who work together. They are, in some sense, figures who have existed before, in different forms, fighting the same fight across multiple iterations of a universe that keeps resetting when the fight ends in the same way. The show does not make this heavy-handed. It shows you the old wall record and lets you sit with the implication. The implication is real. Everything the show has depicted, all 8 seasons, is one iteration of an event that has happened countless times before, and it has never ended differently. Cheer Up Pops aired on January 16, 2017, the same day as the series finale, and it is the episode that prepares the audience for Pops' death by preparing Pops himself. The park crew throws a party for Pops before the confrontation with Anti-Pops. Pops is afraid, not of dying exactly, but of failing, of being the version of himself who cannot break the cycle, who fights Anti-Pops and loses and resets the universe, and erases everyone he loves. He confesses this fear openly, and it is the most emotionally direct Pops has been in the entire series. In Cheer Up Pops, the crew also uploads their memories to Blu-ray discs, a physical record of their lives and their friendships that will survive even if the universe resets. This is not presented as a strategy or a plan. It is presented as an act of love. We want something of us to survive, even if we do not. The Blu-ray discs become crucial in the finale, when Mordecai and Rigby bury them and later dig them up, using the preserved memories to rebuild their understanding of what happened. The act of recording memory against the possibility of its loss is the show's most explicit statement about what it values, not the events themselves, but the record of how they felt. The finale, a regular epic final battle, aired in 3 parts on January 16, 2017. By most reports, it drew about 1.25 million viewers for the first part, and slightly more for the parts that followed, making it the most watched episode of the 8th season. It is the culmination of everything the show has built since the first episode, and it takes everything the show has said about death across 8 years and brings it to the only conclusion that makes sense. The battle with Anti-Pops begins in space. Death, the supernatural entity who has been a recurring figure in the show since Season 2, fights on the side of the park crew in this final confrontation. He has been an antagonist, a neutral force, and now he is an ally. His arc across the series mirrors the show's overall arc with mortality. The show started by treating death as a comic adversary, and it ends with death fighting alongside life against something worse than either. Anti-Pops reaches his Titan form during the battle. At this scale, he erases most of the park crew and the allies from existence with a gesture. The erasure is not like death in the show's earlier seasons, not a soul being collected or a body being destroyed, but a removal from the fabric of what exists. The characters simply stop being present. The show has spent 8 years developing Muscle Man from a recurring joke character into a figure with genuine emotional depth, a person who married someone he loved and built a life, and then it erases him in the same gesture that erases everyone else. This is what Anti-Pops represents. Not the death that comes for individuals, but the end of the story entirely. Pops and Anti-Pops collide in Titan form, and the collision, as every previous collision between them has done, begins to reset the universe. The timeline reverts toward the beginning. Rigby retains his memories. Mordecai does not, initially, but recovers his through the Blu-ray discs they buried. The reset loops back toward the pilot episode. Then Pops does something different. Every previous incarnation of Pops has fought Anti-Pops and lost. The cycle has always ended the same way. Collision, reset, loss. Pops realizes, in this iteration, that the fight itself is what perpetuates the cycle. He cannot win by fighting. He can only win by not fighting. So he does the thing that no previous version of him thought to do. He hugs his brother. Anti-Pops has been the embodiment of pure destruction since before the universe that contains him was created. He has never been offered anything except opposition. Pops offers him love, and for a moment, Anti-Pops is reached. The hatred softens. Something underneath the destruction that has defined him responds to his brother, and for a few seconds they are just brothers. And it is devastating to watch because you know it cannot last, and because you know what Pops is about to do. Pops pushes them both into the sun. Both are destroyed. Anti-Pops, in his final moments, reconciles with his brother. They fly into the star together, and the universe is saved, and the cycle is broken for the first time in however many iterations it has been running. Pops' death is the most emotionally complete moment in the show's run. Not because it is dramatic, though it is, but because it makes sense on every level simultaneously. The character who was always defined by gentleness and goodness breaks the cycle not through power, but through love. He dies not in combat, but in an embrace. The show earns this death because it has spent 8 years showing you exactly who Pops is. All the characters erased by Anti-Pops are restored when the cycle is broken. The universe continues. The park crew survives. The epilogue that follows is set more than 20 years later. The show jumps forward and shows you what everyone became. Mordecai became a successful artist and married a female bat named Steph. They have 3 children together. Rigby married Eileen, and they raised 2 daughters. Muscleman and Starla built a family with several children of their own. High Five Ghost has a partner and a son and a life he has clearly grown into. Benson eventually finds a version of family life that fits him, and Skips remains at the park, unchanged, because he is immortal and the park is where he has always been. Every one of these outcomes is shown briefly, without dialogue, in a fast montage, and every one of them is legible, because the show has spent so long letting you understand these characters that even a single image of an adult version is enough to complete the picture. Mr. Maillard, Pops' adoptive father, dies at some point in the epilogue period. A statue of him is erected at the park next to a statue of Pops. He spent his entire life protecting a destiny he could not stop and giving his alien son as much ordinary life as possible. The show does not detail the circumstances of his death or make it a narrative event. It is simply present in the epilogue as a fact. A statue next to a statue, 2 losses acknowledged in stone. And Pops. Pops is seen at the end, watching his friends' lives play out from somewhere else. He is watching them through what appears to be a VHS tape labeled Regular Show. His friends are the show. The show is his friends. He says, at the very end, 2 words, "Jolly good show." Then it is over. During the closing montage, the song Heroes by David Bowie plays. This was chosen specifically as a tribute to Bowie, who died on January 10, 2016, during the production of Season 8. The show was not yet finished when Bowie died, and whoever made the decision to use Heroes as the closing music understood what they were doing. The song is about 2 people standing against something larger than themselves, in the shadow of something that will eventually end, and finding in that moment something worth holding on to. It is about love that exists in the face of destruction. It is exactly right for what the finale is. Season 8's contribution to the show's mythology of death is not only in its finale, but in the episodes leading up to it. Specifically, in how those episodes reveal what has always been true about the park and the people in it. The Ice Tape, which aired in the autumn of 2016, is the episode that makes the full emotional cost of what Pops is facing legible. Through a message left by Pops' biological father before sending him away from the planet Lollyland, the episode reveals that Pops has always been moving toward the confrontation with Anti-Pops, that his entire life in the park has been a kind of parenthesis in a story that was written before he arrived. His biological father sent him away not in rejection, but in love. The man wanted to give his son time, a world, people to care about before the end that was always coming. Mr. Maillard, who adopted Pops and raised him and has been a gruff, businesslike presence throughout the series, had understood this from the beginning and had spent decades maintaining the ordinary life his son needed. The revelation reframes every scene between Mr. Maillard and Pops across 8 seasons. Every time Mr. Maillard seemed impatient or distracted, or more interested in the park's functioning than in his son, he was also a man protecting a secret he could never speak. He could not tell Pops what was coming. He could not stop it. He could only give Pops as much of an ordinary life as possible before it arrived. and gruffness was perhaps the only way he knew to love someone he understood he was going to lose. This is the show doing what it does best, hiding something genuinely moving inside a character who has mostly functioned as a comedic obstacle, and then revealing it at a point in the story when the audience is ready to feel the full weight of it. Mr. Maillard's eventual death, occurring in the epilogue span and indicated only by a statue at the park, is the show's quietest acknowledgement of loss. He does not get a death scene, he does not get a farewell, he gets a monument placed next to his son's monument, two statues in the park that was always the center of both their lives. The choice to handle his death this way, off-screen, in the past tense, noted through stone rather than narrative, is right for the character and right for the show. Mr. Mallard spent his life doing quiet, unglamorous things out of love for someone who could not know the full extent of what he was doing. His death is handled the same way. Cheer Up, Pops, the episode that precedes the finale and aired on the same day, is the show taking time to let Pops be afraid. Throughout the series, Pops has been defined by gentleness and by a quality of innocence the show has always protected carefully. He is the character who finds joy in the simplest things, who is moved by kindness, who does not carry the cynicism or frustration that marks most of the other characters, allowing him to be frightened, to confess that he is afraid of failing, afraid of being the version of himself who cannot break the cycle, afraid of causing all his friends' deaths by not being enough. Is the show treating him as a fully realized person rather than a narrative function? The crew's response to his fear is to throw him a party. This is exactly the right response. Not a tactical briefing or a pep talk about destiny, but a party, the thing the park crew knows how to do together. The decision to upload their memories to Blu-ray discs during that party, to create a physical record of their lives against the possibility of everything being erased, is the show finding the specific detail that makes the emotional stakes concrete. They are not preserving strategy or capability. They are preserving the memory of how it felt to be themselves, in this park, with each other. The choice of Blu-ray as the vessel, a consumer format that was already in the process of being superseded by streaming when the show was made, is right because it is physical and specific and slightly fragile, which is exactly what the memories themselves are. The finale's battle sequences in A Regular Epic Final Battle are staged as a cosmic confrontation, and the deaths and near-deaths within them are proportional in scale to everything the show has built. Death fighting on the side of the park crew is the visual that most clearly marks how far the show has traveled since Over the Top. He was the adversary then, the figure using the wager as a weapon, collecting Rigby's soul, and making Skips negotiate for its return. Now he is fighting alongside them against a force that even the supernatural order of the universe cannot survive unchanged. The show does not explain this shift through dialogue. It just shows him there, fighting, and trusts the audience to understand what it means. Whether death is among those temporarily erased by anti-pops in Titan form is not entirely clear. The show is ambiguous on this point, which may be deliberate. Death as a supernatural entity may have a different relationship to anti-pops' erasure power than the mortal and semi-mortal characters around him. If death can be erased, then anti-pops represents something that even the cosmic order of the show's universe cannot survive. If death cannot be erased, then he is the one constant, the thing that persists through even a reset, which is its own kind of statement about what death is in relation to everything else. The uncertainty is interesting, regardless of how it resolves. What is certain is that Muscle Man and High Five Ghost are among those erased, and the weight of this is particular because of what the show has built around them. Muscle Man married Starla. High Five Ghost has become part of a life he has built for himself. Both of them have moved, over the course of the series, from being comedic supporting figures to being people with full emotional lives, relationships they chose, futures they are building. Erasing them in the finale is not a casual action. The show has spent seasons developing what they stand to lose, and then it shows you what it looks like when they lose it, even temporarily. The restoration that follows Pops' sacrifice does not undo the moment of erasure. It just gives the moment a limit. Rigby's arc in the finale deserves particular attention because of what it reveals about who he has become. Rigby started the show as the most irresponsible character, the one most likely to cause problems through laziness or deception or impulsiveness. He was the one who connected the wires in Season 1. He was the one who put the film in backwards in grave sites, He cheated against Skips and triggered the chain of events that led to his own death in Over the Top. His early characterization is built on the comedy of consequences for consistently bad decisions. By the finale, Rigby is the person who retains his memories through the universe reset. He is the one who buries the Blu-ray discs containing the park crew's memories, who preserves the record of their lives against the possibility of loss. He is the one who digs them up afterward and gives Mordecai back what he lost. The journey from the raccoon who could not follow a simple warning note to the person who thinks to preserve memory in the face of cosmic reset is the show's quietest, most sustained character arc. It happens between the lines of other stories, and by the time you notice it has happened, it has been happening for years. The show never announces this transformation. It just shows you who Rigby is in the finale and trusts you to remember who he was in the first episode. The Blu-ray discs are the show's most specific and human detail in the finale. They are a physical object, a slightly outdated consumer format, and the show uses this medium as the vessel for something the characters most want to preserve. Not their identities or their abilities or the things that make them useful in a battle, but their memories of each other. The record of how it felt to be this group of people, in this park, during these years. The choice of a physical, fallible, format-specific medium is right because the memories they are preserving are not information. They are the texture of a specific time that will not come again, and that kind of thing needs a physical home. Pops's final scene, watching his friends through the VHS tape labeled Regular Show, is the show closing the loop on its own existence in the most elegant way available to it. The show becomes its own title in the afterlife. The VHS format, older than the Blu-ray discs, more fragile, the medium of a previous era, is the one Pops has access to, and this is the show saying something about memory and time without needing to say it explicitly. What Pops watches is not a recording. It is the show itself, the entirety of what the audience experienced across 8 seasons, playing for the person it was always really about. He watches his friends grow old and build their lives, and have children, and become what they were going to become without him. He says it is a jolly good show. He means it. The show means it. The David Bowie tribute that closes the episode is worth dwelling on before we move to what it all means. Heroes plays during the epilogue montage, over the images of the park crew's adult lives, and the choice is not incidental. Bowie died on January 10, 2016, roughly a year before the finale aired, while Season 8 was still in production. The decision to use Heroes as the closing music is the show's explicit acknowledgement of a real-world loss incorporated into its fictional conclusion. Bowie's music has always been about persistence in the face of something that cannot be defeated entirely, about finding meaning in a moment, even when the moment is bounded by something larger and darker. The song's narrator and his companion are heroes just for one day. Pops was a hero at the end of a very long story. The overlap is not coincidental, and the fact that the show chose to honor Bowie's death through its ending, rather than through a more conventional tribute, says something about the kind of show it was. Regular Show did not make a memorial episode. It made its ending a memorial, and it made the memorial beautiful. There is something worth saying, now that we have been through all of it, about what Regular Show was actually doing with death across 8 seasons. The early deaths in the show, the destroyer of worlds burning party guests, the hot dogs eating themselves, GBF exploding in goo, these are death as spectacle. They serve the episode's comedy or its threat, and they are not designed to make you feel the loss of what was destroyed. They establish the rules of the world. In Regular Show, death is real. It is accessible. It can arrive from the most absurd possible direction. It is not yet personal. Death becomes personal in Season 2, when Skips has to negotiate for Rigby's soul. The relationship between those two characters, the immortal who has outlived everyone he loved, and the young raccoon who has not lived long enough to understand the cost of the moment, is what makes Over the Top more than a supernatural arm wrestling episode. From that point forward, every death in the show is connected to a relationship. Dave's decapitation matters because of what it did to Benson. Mona's death matters because of what it made Skips. The Fallen Guardian's death matters because the Guardians are a community, and the community is smaller now. The death character's arc across the show tracks this exactly. He begins as an antagonist, someone using the wager mechanism to extract souls and accumulate power over the park crew. He loses to Skips twice, and both times the loss is the result of a trick or an act of desperate commitment rather than superior power. He is not defeated because the park crew is stronger. He is defeated because the park crew loves each other more than he expected, and love in this show is the force that consistently defeats death. The arm wrestling match that saves Rigby is won with a cheat that represents Skip's willingness to absorb humiliation. The bowling match that saves the park crew's souls is won because Skips will not let his friends pay for his past. Death keeps losing because the mechanism he uses, the wager, assumes that the other party will act rationally in their own self-interest, and the park crew consistently does not. By the finale, Death is fighting alongside them. He has moved from antagonist to ally, not through a redemption arc, but through something more interesting. Through the accumulating weight of every time the park crew refused to behave the way the universe expected. They turned Death into a negotiating table and then kept winning the negotiations. Eventually, the figure responsible for death has to acknowledge that these particular people have found a relationship with mortality that he cannot simply override. Pops' sacrifice is the final statement of that argument. Anti-Pops is a force that cannot be defeated by power, that has reset the universe countless times when opposed directly. Pops breaks the cycle not by overpowering him, but by doing the one thing that the cycle does not account for, showing his brother love. He dies for it. He knows he will die for it. He chooses it anyway. The show began with a demon burning party guests to ash in the second episode and ended with a lollipop-shaped alien flying into the sun because he loved his brother and loved his friends and loved the world enough to give it the chance to continue. The distance between those two things, across 8 seasons and 244 episodes, is the distance between death as a punchline and death as the most serious thing a story can say. Regular show understood something that a lot of shows do not. The way a story treats death is the way a story treats life. If death is consequence-free, life is consequence-free. If death is reversible whenever it is inconvenient, the stakes are never real. Regular show let some deaths be reversible. Yes, the show always found a way to bring back the people who mattered, but it was honest about the cost of reversal, and it was honest about the deaths that could not be undone. Dave stayed dead. Mona stayed dead. The fallen guardian stayed dead. Pops, in the end, chose a death that broke a cycle that would otherwise have taken everything else. The show also understood something about the audience it was building over its run. Regular show premiered in 2010. The children who were 8 or 9 years old when the first season aired were in their late teens or early 20s when the finale played. They grew up with these characters in the literal sense. The same years in which Mordecai and Rigby were navigating their slacker 20s, learning to take things seriously, learning the cost of their worst impulses. Those were the years their audience was doing something structurally similar, at a different scale. The show grew up as its audience grew up, and the deaths in it grew more serious as its viewers became more capable of understanding serious things. This is not unique to regular show. Some animated shows track their audiences in this way, grow in emotional sophistication, alongside the people watching them. But regular show did it without any of the self-congratulation that sometimes attends that kind of ambition. It never announced that it was a serious show that dealt with serious themes. It stayed a show about a park and 2 slackers who could not mow the lawn on time, and it trusted that if the serious things were handled with enough care and honesty, the audience would find them without being told to. Pops' death is the example the show produced for the audience that had grown up with it. The children who found The Destroyer of Worlds funny in 2010 were old enough in 2017 to understand what it means to choose to die for the people you love, to hold your brother even when he is trying to unmake everything, to push both of you into the sun because the alternative is that the universe resets and none of it ever happened. That understanding requires some years on you. Regular show earned the right to ask for it by spending 8 seasons building toward the moment when it would be needed. The deaths in the original series belong to a completed story. Pops is gone. Mona is gone. Dave is gone. The show does not offer them back. It just spends its 8 seasons letting you know them, and then it lets you keep the memory of them the way any real memory works, as something you carry, and something that changes what you carry it into. There is something right about that. One of the things regular show says about death, across 8 seasons, is that the dead do not come back just because you want them to. The show brings back specific characters through specific mechanisms: time reversal, soul wagers, timeline erasure. But the deaths that do not have a reversal mechanism, they stay. The reversal mechanisms in the show are the exception, not the rule. They require effort and cost, and someone willing to arm wrestle death or reset a timeline at the expense of the future in it. The deaths that happen and stay, Mona, Dave, the Fallen Guardian, and eventually Pops, those are the show's honest acknowledgement of what death usually is. The thing that does not come undone, regardless of how much you would prefer it to. The jolly good show moment is the image I keep coming back to when I think about what regular show ultimately was. Pops, watching his friends through a VHS tape in whatever afterlife-adjacent place he now occupies, seeing them have the ordinary lives that his sacrifice made possible, and finding it good. Not transcendent, not cosmic, not the language of the mythology the show built around his destiny. Good. A show worth watching. A life worth having. The simplicity of the phrasing is the point. This is a character who was the embodiment of pure good, who fought a cosmic battle for the survival of the universe, and whose final verdict on everything is something your grandmother might say at the end of a Sunday afternoon program. The show collapses the mythological and the mundane into two words, and it is exactly right. A revival of the show, regular show, The Lost Tapes, premiered on Cartoon Network in May of 2026. It is a set of stories presented as untold adventures from the era of the original run, a collection of additional material from the time of the show we know, rather than a continuation past the finale. This is the right creative choice, and it reflects something accurate about what the original series was. A story that ended where it needed to end, with Pops watching the tape and calling it a jolly good show. A sequel that extended beyond the finale would have to explain what happens after perfect endings, which is a problem with no good solution. The Lost Tapes sidesteps this problem by going back to the world of the original run and filling in the spaces rather than extending the timeline. It is an acknowledgement that the show's ending was real and that its integrity is worth protecting. The deaths in the original series are not revisited in the Lost Tapes. They are part of the completed story, and the anthology format of the revival treats the original run as a period of time with a known outcome, which means the characters who die in it died in ways that are fixed and final. Pops is still gone. Mona is still gone. Dave is still gone. The revival does not offer them back. It just spends more time in the world that contains the memory of them. There is something right about that. The dead in regular show do not come back just because someone would like them to. The show is honest about that even when it lets you spend more time with the characters who survived them. The show ended on January 16, 2017, with David Bowie singing about being heroes, just for one day, and a gentle alien watching his friends grow old and build their lives through a screen in whatever place he went after the sun. He called it a jolly good show. He was right. It was. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.